Hi, my name is Dr. Adam Manley. I'm Associate Professor of Career and Technical Education at Western Michigan University, and this is the first Module 1 presentation for the Career and Tech Ed 5150 Grant Writing for Career and Technical Education course. Today what we're going to be talking about is a brief overview of the introduction of the text and then the first step, which is developing a grant proposal. Now, it's important, since this is the first presentation, to understand that this in no way will cover all the information within the text. It's just the main ideas that will introduce the topic to you. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is the type of support your typical organization needs. Then we're going to talk about the grant proposal process, talk about how the textbook is laid out, talk about the type of grant proposals that are out there, some broad overall grant proposal tips, and then we're going to briefly talk about step 1 and logic modeling. No matter the organization, every organization needs support. They need support for operating costs, for program funding or project funding, for capacity building efforts, for the equipment or the capital needed to run the organization. Also, a typical organization will try to have an endowment. Then there's also 2 other areas of planning for the future and then also researching for the future or researching for upcoming projects. Now, not every one of these could potentially get a grant to help fund it. However, an organization needs a lot of money to make it happen. And so grants can help in certain areas. On the surface, the grant proposal process is fairly simple. More than likely, your organization has an unmet need. So you develop a clear plan on how to make that need met. You then research funders, try to find a funding agency that could help you do this. You would build relationships with the funders through correspondence. Then you would also want to make sure that you target your proposals effectively. And then you would want to write a concise proposal that spells out exactly what you're looking for from the funding agency. However, even though we know this, we know that it's very difficult to write grants, to write successful grants. There has to be a cover letter. There's an executive summary. There's some type of problem statement. There's a background on the organization. There's goals and objectives that have to be measurable. There's methods to achieve those goals. There's an evaluation to make sure that those accomplishments are actually happening. And then there's the whole idea of trying to sustain funding over many, many years or iterations of the grant. And of course, you've got to develop a concise and fair budget. So while the process seems simple, the actual writing of the grant is pretty extensive. Now, there's different types of grant proposals. There's a letter of intent, and then there's a full proposal. Right now, I'm working on a letter of intent for a federal grant for the Federal Aviation Administration. And so it's just a small proposal, not really extensive at this point. Eventually, if they like what I put in the letter of intent, they'll ask for me to write a full proposal. Now, in this course, you'll essentially write a full proposal so that you can go through the entire grant writing process. Now, there's some overall tips when it comes to writing grants that are important to start out talking about. The one is to put yourself in their shoes. It's important to remember that you're not dealing with machines, you're not dealing with computers, you're dealing with individuals, humans. And so, especially when we're talking about private or nonprofit grants, you want to make sure you have the right type of emotion. These are people that feel very passionate about their organization. And so they want to make sure their funds go to an agency or an organization or a person that meets the same ideals. So you want to tell a very compelling story. Most of the time, like I said, especially when you're dealing with private or nonprofit. When you're working with federal grants or state grants, well, it needs to be more matter of fact. It's important to understand that a grant is an investment on the part of the funding agency. They're investing in your organization or yourself. And it's also important to understand that funders have limited resources. And so while they may have a lot of money, there may be a lot of people that want that money. And so they have to be very selective on who they choose to fund. It's also important to read very closely the grant guidelines. It's also important to use relevant and up-to-date facts. Let's say you want to fund an idea on how to reduce adolescent smoking. And so you would want to use the most relevant statistics on the prevalence of adolescent smoking. The last thing you'd want to do is use statistics from even 2010, because those would be considered out of date to a funding agency that knows what you're talking about. You also want to try to keep the doom and gloom out of the equation. Keep it as positive as you can. Don't spell out that, without this funding, the agency will go out of business or you will not be able to do something. You need to keep it positive. Develop the proposal summary last. So one of the first things that's actually on the grant will be a proposal summary, or sometimes called an executive summary. You actually want to develop that last, because then that's the only time where you'll fully understand what this proposal entails, and so it's a perfect time to write it. We also want to make sure that we keep it simple, stupid, right? Avoid using jargon and try not to be too wordy in a grant proposal. So I like to, just like we call death by PowerPoint, I like to call it death by words, because you just try to throw too many words into the proposal. It's also important that before you submit the proposal, you obtain some type of feedback. So in this course, you're going to draft a grant proposal towards the end of the semester, and then I will review it and provide feedback to you before you submit your final submission. And then, of course, plan far ahead. So one of the first things you're going to do in this course is you're going to plan your proposal right off the bat. And then we're going to work on it the entire semester. So it's important to understand that many of these funding agencies are looking a year, 6 months in advance. So if you need the money right now, it's too late. You've got to be thinking at least, I would suggest, a year ahead of time when planning for funding through grants. So let's talk about the very first step. The very first step is about developing the concept or idea that you want funded. And so the first thing you have to do is you have to find out what parts of your program or your organization are most fundable. Now, it's important for us to point out that I keep on using the word organization, but in case you happen to be a teacher taking this course, then remember that the same rule applies for your classroom or what you would consider your career and technical education program. We have all these needs, and we only have so much support. And so it's identifying the right need with the right grant. And so you have to find out which one's most fundable. Now, it's important to understand that most funders like new programs or supporting successful ideas or programs. So they typically don't like to take something that's not working and throw more money at it. They want to do either a new program, something that's innovative, that still relates to their mission and purpose, or they want to support something by enhancing something that's already working pretty well. It's important also to remember to begin with the end in mind. So what we mean by this is that you want to think about, what is the ultimate goal here? What is it that I really want to do? And then, if applicable, try to bring the right people to the table for brainstorming. So in an organization, this could be fairly simple. You bring in business and industry, you bring in community partners, and you have them help you brainstorm kind of the end, what you really want to get out of this. When you're a lone person trying to go for a grant, you can still bring in the right people. You can consult the people that you think would know the most, that would have the most knowledge on the area that you seek funding in, and you would talk to them. Start with the planning sections, as they are the core. And so we'll talk about these planning sections, and you can find them in the text. And then you're going to write the organizational background, the summary, and the cover letter. That's something that you end up doing after you do the planning sections. It's some of the last stuff that you do in writing your grant. One tool that many grant writers use to not only demonstrate how their program works, but also how the funding is intended to work, is they'll use a logic model. A logic model, as it states here, is a valuable tool that shows the basic program picture of how the organization's idea or their program is intended to work. And so if you look at this illustration from a different text that I just thought kind of spells it out, is that you'd have this simple type of logic model. And you can almost use this logic model either visually or more in the sense of the way in which you set up your grant proposal. So you have this problem. And then you have certain resources and inputs that will help solve the problem, right? And then you've got all these strategies and activities. And then out of those strategies and activities, you're going to have outputs. And so out of that output, you'll have short-term outcomes, long-term outcomes, and then you'll have ultimately impacts. And all this revolves around certain assumptions. So let's go into a little bit deeper, and you'll probably be able to understand it as we go through. So from that same text, they also have a template for a simple logic model. And so this template basically just shows that, for resources, what are the resources that are reasonably available? Strategies, what will be the activities and events? Outputs, what are the initial product of these activities? Short term, what changes are expected in the short term? The long-term outcomes, what changes do you want to occur after the initial outcomes? And then impacts, what are the anticipated changes over the long haul? So if we take this and look at a college readiness program, then if you look here, you'll notice above it, it says the problem statement. Low-income high school students in selected communities attend college at a lower rate than their middle-class peers, leading to more limited opportunities, higher rates of unemployment, and lower earnings. So there's the problem. And so what are the resources? Well, the resources for this particular program would be a partnership with 3 public schools, community mentors, local university space for parent meetings, volunteer college admissions, student volunteers for childcare at parent meetings. And then as you go through, you can see where they've come up with strategies and activities. And then out of those strategies and activities, there's certain outputs. And out of those outputs, there's going to be short-term and long-term outcomes, and then an ultimate impact. So let's look at this from a visual perspective. This is from another text from a college class I took while at Virginia Tech on logic modeling. If you look here are the inputs. And I like this because it kind of spells it out in a grant fashion. So there's this ARC's community capacity projects, which really doesn't matter. It's more of just to show you what this looks like on a visual perspective. So you've got your inputs. There's a grant, there is some type of learning project, and then there's state and local funds. All those are funneled into the activities within the program. And so you'll notice that you've got some type of visioning and direction, and you've got involvement in skills and knowledge and technical assistance. And then you'll notice at the very bottom, there's this idea of context. And so what that is those are the assumptions. They're assuming that the economic conditions will stay the same and that the demographics will stay the same. And then if you look over here at outcomes, then here are the outcomes. Individuals, organizations, communities improve planning, increase collaboration, enhance their skills. And so those are some of the short-term outcomes, and then you look at the outcomes that are more long-term. It's going to be more of the impact. It's going to be a stronger economy, a healthier environment, and improved social conditions. So when you're writing your grant, I'm not saying that you have to do a logic model, but for some of us, it helps us kind of visualize what we're actually trying to accomplish. So what are the next steps? Well, an optional step, depending on your situation, I realize some of the people taking this course may actually be a part of an organization, and so you'll be writing grants. And so I suggest maybe you go through the worksheet 1.1 in the text. But you don't have to do that. But for some people, it may help you kind of get your idea set in your head about what you want to do regarding your grant proposal. If that's not the case, then you're definitely going to be required to work on Module 1 assignment and the discussion board posting. I wish you the best of luck.